It's U of L Today on 93.9 The Ville. Here's your host, Mark Hebert.
And welcome to U of L Today with Mark Hebert on 93.9 The Ville. This is the show that's about all things University of Louisville. Today we've got an interesting story to tell you about a young man that's a student and a police officer at the University of Louisville. We'll get to them in just a second. But also on the show today, is there really a chance an asteroid could hit the Earth? Why are astronomers upset about a New Zealand company launching a giant disco ball into space? Well, those are some of the things we'll be talking about with UofL Astronomy professor Gerry Williger just a little bit later in the show. But first, this is truly an inspirational and enlightening story about two guys who were brought together by tragedy, reconnected years later at the University of Louisville. Will Brown is a University of Louisville police officer. Stevonte Wood is a student at UofL. But that's just a bit part of their story together, and they are here to share it with us. Gentlemen, good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
Good to see you. All right, Stevonte, you are what year at U of L?
I am a senior right now, major in criminal justice, and I'm actually minoring in political science so I can pursue my master's faster.
Political science and criminal justice, that's kind of a dangerous combo there, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
All right, and Will, you've been an officer with ULPD for how long?
Roughly 4 years. I'm retired from Louisville Metro, where I was before.
Okay, and that kind of leads us back to our story here. So,
Yes,
Stevonte, why don't you kind of describe for folks the tragic thing that hit your family and how you and Will came to be pals?
When I was 13 years old, I witnessed the murder of my mother and brother, and there were two detectives working that case, Cal Willett and Brenda Westcott, phenomenal detectives. And years later, I came to the University of Louisville and started working at UofL PD. Seen the Detective Brown and asked if I could do a ride along with them sometime and come to some enlightenment of what officers do. And we just ended up talking about what I went through, and he figured out who I was, and it was a shock because I didn't know that he did so much work behind the scenes, and he didn't know who I was. So when we first were informed of each other, it was just like, this is awesome. I mean, you have to kind of believe in God at that point, because how does that even work? Couldn't do it if you tried. So it's a blessing. It's a blessing. You know, he's been a great tutor, and now we're like family. So,
So, Will, you worked a little bit on that murder case, right?
Yes, sir, I did. As he said, Cal Willett and Brenda Westcott was the lead detectives, but something a lot of people don't know is there's so many people behind the scenes, not that you want credit or anything, but the ironic thing was I knew of Stevonte, but we had never met back 8 years ago. And I did some of the search warrants on the case and some of the contacts trying to pick up people for what Cal needed us to do. And like he said, years later, I see this guy on campus, and he's a new cadet, and those guys are basically there to learn, so because their apprenticeship to be a policeman. But he was bouncing everywhere. Every time I turned the corner, can I ride with you? Can I do this? You open the door, he's
Very
right there,
tenacious.
and I'm like, who is this guy? And very, very driven. And I later figured out from another staff member that he was affected by that violent crime.
Right.
And everything came together after that.
All right, we're talking with Officer Will Brown, Detective Will Brown with the University of Louisville police officer, and Stevonte Wood, who's a student at the University of Louisville, who lost his mother and brother at age, you were 13. 8 years ago, to murder in West Louisville, I think, correct?
it was actually in the south end of Louisville, so
Newburgh?
Shavley.
Shively area.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what'd you go through when you were 13 years old? Did you witness the crime?
Yes, sir.
You witnessed your mom and your brother getting shot.
Well, I witnessed my mother getting shot. She was right next to me, and she was actually paralyzed on her whole left side. So I was a caretaker for her about 3 years before that happened. And, she had to learn how to speak again, walk again, eat again. And when she did learn how to eat, she had to learn how to swallow again. So it was just a very long process. And then once that happened, once she was shot, I wasn't, I went into kind of a shock because I was picking her off the ground a lot. And when she fell, so once she fell to the ground, I was, trying to help her up. And my friend was like yelling at me, telling me that she was dead. And then I seen some very graphic stuff like blood and all that. So came to the realization that I needed to call 911 and try to get some help. So I ran outside to see where my brother and my father was, and my brother was actually laying on the ground and in a puddle of blood. So that shocked me, obviously, and I ran back inside and finished calling 911. The police arrived, and I actually didn't know who he was until a recent speech I did. Officer Kelsey was talking to me in his police car, and he was kind of calming me down, and that support, even though it was periodically, because when you go through stuff like that, you kind of rebel against people, against the world, and therefore people retaliate by saying, well, this is a problem child, this is someone who's not going to amount to anything. And hearing that kind of fed into that rebellious stage. But there were officers who reached out, both of the lead detectives on the case, Brenda and Cal. They continuously reached out to me and tried to make sure I was on the right track. And
when you were a teenager then, from age 13 to 15, you started going down this rebellious track.
Yes, sir.
But what you're telling me is police officers came back even as they were working the case.
Yep.
And they counseled you and talked to you, and so I guess is that how you developed your respect for police officers?
Most definitely.
Like Will?
Most definitely. Even my father benefited from this. I mean, he was busy raising me while grieving and mourning the loss of his wife and son. So first, props to him for standing up and not drinking or doing drugs and stuff like that after a very tragic situation. But Brenda and Cal, they were amazing as far as like reaching out to us and making sure that we weren't feeding the monster inside, such as retaliating and doing drugs and stuff like that. So that's where that relationship came from.
Will, from your perspective, we'll talk a little bit more about you coming to college here at the University of Louisville in a minute, Stevonte. But from your perspective, when you look at this young man, how do you describe him, and what do you say about him to other people?
Well, Stevonte's very driven, and he's a tenacious guy. But at the same time, he's a gracious young man. Very uncommon to meet a person like him. I was lucky to be exposed to him at the job, and it's all because of his first contact with police officers. It was in a bad situation, but the policeman took the time to talk to him. And even though he went through a tough spot at that time, he was able to pull from that. And as you said, when we met again, it was just so weird. And not to mean we met again, but as we were connected again, it was just so weird. But like I said, when I was working, and I started on patrol when I met him, and of course, he wanted to learn more. He has plenty of questions. Very, very articulate, and just a kind guy. A lot of people have a chip on their shoulder, are looking for something free or anything like that, but not Stevonte. He's a very intelligent guy, kind, and what started off like he calls it a mentorship, I consider him a friend.
We're talking with Will Brown, who's a police officer with the UofL Police Department, and Stevonte Wood, who's a senior at the University of Louisville, and as he described, went through some harrowing times as a teenager, seeing both his mom and his brother shot and murdered down in the southwest part of Jefferson County. Stevonte, you're a senior, and as you mentioned earlier, you're majoring in political science, but also criminal justice. You trying to be a cop?
Yes, sir. That's actually one of my goals, one of the many, and just kind of seeing that police officers can do so much more than just patrolling the beat or writing tickets. The impact that they can have on one's life, because usually they see people in the worst times of their life, such as myself, and it's the things that they can say because they're in that moment, they're in that situation, they're physically there, and they have that opportunity. So much that they can do, and I want to be a part of that, and I want to show people like, hey, when you come in contact with a police officer, I want to make sure you have a good experience like I did. I want to share that with people. because I've been fortunate to be surrounded around great police officers, and that's something that I'm very thankful for.
Well, Will, you're in the Cadet Program too, right, Stevonte?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
which is basically a training program to see if you want to become a police officer.
Yes, sir.
And Will, are you the guy he rides around with when he's
When
he's on duty?
He rode with a couple of guys. Primarily, it seemed like he stuck to me a little bit more. I couldn't shake him. But I started off on patrol, and now that I'm a detective, I've been in the detective's office now for a year and a half, and he's still, a lot of people would stray away and be like, well, I'm not sure I want to do the paperwork portion or going to court. He's been consistent. Mm-hmm. He wants to learn, asked plenty of questions, has been to court with me since I've had that transition. So it's been fun.
Mm-hmm. And what have you found as a police officer at the University of Louisville versus your time at Metro Police? What's the difference between a campus setting and dealing with students like Stevonte and just being out on the street as a Louisville police officer?
The biggest difference is you're in a small city community when you're at the University of Louisville, and it's just different than being on a beat or being in the outer city in one of the divisions, because everybody is it's like a small town, and everybody speaks for another person. Everybody's accounted for, whether it's a parent or a student or a peer, whereas we still have people on campus that are like homeless that pass through, and we try to get them to the right spot. But for the most part, everybody's accounted for on the campus, and you really have to listen to their needs when you're dealing with a student compared to an outsider, which you still do the same thing, but everybody is somebody's baby here on campus. That's basically how it is, and you take extra care and taking care of what they need.
And it's a really safe campus. We should mention as well the
Yes,
Belknap
sir,
campus.
it is.
Yep.
It is.
All right. And Stevonte, what have you learned from the University of? Well, first of all, how in the world did you even get to college? And how did you pick the University of Louisville?
I got with. It's actually kind of funny because I didn't really know much about UofL, and I've lived near my whole life, so it's kind of weird. But I started asking questions at school, and that's another thing people should know. Like, of course, there are resources that many people may not have compared to the average person. But what I did was kind of maximize what I did have, and just allocated what I could within those resources. So when I went to Western High School, because I got kicked out of Butler because I was, kind of being a trouble kid.
Like you said, right?
I was being a trouble kid, and I went to Western High School, and I kind of just started asking questions about college because I was like, all right, enough's enough. Like, I'm tired of people telling me I'm not going to amount to nothing. I'm not going to do much.
So you set your mind to it. You were determined to go to college.
I was determined. So I started, asking these questions, and they were like, all right, depending on the grades that you get, you can, get keys money and stuff like that. So I was like, all right, well, that's good because I can't afford college. So I had a plan early, and I actually got involved with the early college program at Western. So I graduated with 31 college credit hours.
So you walked in with basically a year of college under your belt.
Almost an associate's degree.
In credits, okay.
Yes, sir.
Very good.
And so once I came here, that obviously kind of garnished my resume. So once I came here, I ended up running into Councilman David James, and he was a speaker in one of my classes previously at JCTC. And I talked to him for a while, and he was like, "You want a job?" And I said, "Yeah." And I told myself I was going to work the first couple months of school because I wanted to focus on school. But, the money started getting tight, so I said, well, I got to do something. So I told him yes.
Okay.
And it happened to be at the UofL, University of Louisville Police Department.
Okay. And there you go. And that's how you.
Yep.
That's how you two met. So you went to JCTC for, I assume, a year, right, to get the rest of your credits under the belt. A cheaper way to do it.
Yes, sir.
Transfer to UofL. Now you're a senior at the University of Louisville. And what is that experience of being on a college campus and being at UofL? What has that feel and that life decision meant for you?
It is so great. You're just in your own world, your own bubble, and it teaches you responsibility to a degree to where you can't really describe it to anyone unless they've come along and had experience as an adult. This right here kind of just excels you to that self-responsibility and kind of bettering yourself and working on yourself. Because when you're here, you're in your own bubble, and You know, you're taking these classes, you're doing pretty much everything according to how you want to. So time management, you know, it's really just about bettering yourself. And that's, besides education, that's what I can tell you about college.
So Stevonte Wood, what would you tell other kids, 13, 14, living in the West End, or anywhere else in Louisville, who may have a tragedy hit them like you had, where you had 2 family members shot and killed? Obviously, that's a dramatic situation, but maybe some situation similar to yours. What would you tell those teenagers about your life path and what they should do?
2 things: you meet great people when you do great things. When you're doing good things, you meet good people. Second, just don't give up. I mean, life is so precious, and when you go through these things, you kind of forget how precious life is because of something that may have happened in your past, but that doesn't define you. You know, me losing my mother and brother doesn't make me some sort of like potential criminal or nothing like that. You know, I'm still Stevonte Wood. I'm still me, and I'm going to be who I want to be. You know, I'm not going to let that, you know, deter me from wherever I want to go. And, you know, also I want people to know, like, I was there. You know, I was moving back and forth from the West End to Shively because I was living with my sister at one point because, you know, I was really hard on my dad. I was like pushing away, and my sister was just like, look, maybe you all need a break. And also my parents lived in the West End when they had me. So I went back and forth from Shively to the West End my whole entire life. And, you know, when you live there, there's a short amount of resources. Like, I can tell you that right now, and people need to know that you know, you're working
there
with
are
what you
resources
have.
there, and there are good people there. Hang around with that, basically. is your
Exactly.
message. Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Any closing words, Will Brown? Does that pretty much cover it?
That pretty much covers it.
Okay. Hey, I appreciate both you being on the show. Glad you reconnected after all these years, and it sounds
Thank
like you're
you.
being a great mentor, Will. Appreciate it.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
the work you
Thank
do,
you.
and good luck with your studies.
Yes, sir.
All right, Stevonte Wood, Will Brown, thanks for being on the show. I try to invite someone from UofL's Astronomy Department 2 or 3 times a year because I enjoy learning and talking about astronomy, and because I'm the guy that gets to pick who's on the show. So, with that in mind, Gerry Williger is an astronomy professor at UofL. He's here to try and answer some of the burning questions about stuff going on in the galaxy. Gerry, good to see you again.
Pleased to be here.
All right, there's always stuff going on out there in
Sky's the
space,
limit.
right? The sky's the
Sorry,
limit.
but
yeah, that's
I have to when I teach, yes.
tip your bartenders and waitresses. Gerry's here all week. Okay, let's talk about this asteroid that flew into our galaxy, I guess.
Our solar system.
Our solar system.
Close.
A couple of months ago. Tell us about it a little bit.
Well, we always expect there to be junk floating around between the stars. Why? Well, and think of our own solar system. You have the planets, then you have little bits and pieces, you have comets, you have asteroids. And if something happens to pass by something big like Jupiter, then they can do a little dance. We often send our spacecraft by Jupiter, and if they go by in the right way, they pick up a lot of speed, and Jupiter loses a little speed, and off they go. And they can go out of the solar system. We've done that with a couple of Voyagers, Pioneer, New Horizons. We've sent stuff out of the solar system that way.
They shoot out of
They
the
shoot
door,
out. It's like a swing your partner, only you have a mouse doing a dance with an elephant. And if they're on the same if they're on the same line, then the mouse will go shooting off faster than the elephant.
Okay.
So what we have is objects can and will be sent out of our solar system. Now there are other solar systems. We see them.
And so
The
they
same
can
thing.
send stuff into
They
our
can
solar
send
system.
stuff to us.
And that's
Same
what's
thing.
happened
It goes
here,
around,
right?
comes around. And we think this happened because we have a sky patrol called Pan-STARRS. And this Pan-STARRS surveys a big chunk of the sky every few days, and it can pick up fast-moving objects. Now, that's actually really important because we want to know if there are asteroids running around which may hit us. But people said, well, we got to find one of these interstellar things. They finally found one, and it's called Oumuamua, something like that. It's a Hawaiian name. It's a tough name.
Yeah.
And it's something like visitor from far away. And so they plotted the orbit, and it came from outside. And
So
it's
why is that a
weird.
big deal?
Well, we've never seen one before. We've predicted it. And this thing is strange enough that it could have implications for life. And here's why. It's got this funny red color. Now, this funny red color, you might think, okay, well, yeah, it's red. Most asteroids, for example, aren't red. Most comets aren't red. But the stuff in the outer solar system, Pluto's actually pretty red if you look at pictures of Pluto. And a lot of the stuff out there really is. And the reason why is they have some some organic molecules on them. They start out with some methane and some water, maybe some ammonia, and then sunlight cooks these molecules, and they hook together, and they make these long compounds called tholins, I don't know why, and then they appear red. And so these outer solar system objects, which are very cold and covered in organic molecules, appear red, and this object has the same color. And it's been out between the stars in the cold of interstellar space for thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years.
So it could have picked up
why.
some life somewhere.
Well, it might have this stuff on it, and it can go between solar systems.
So this thing's floating around where in our solar system? Where is it
It's
right
on its
now?
way out. It's on a one-way
So
trip
it's not going to
out.
crash to Earth.
No, luckily no.
Is there a chance that we could ever get an asteroid that could either come close to Earth or hit Earth?
Well, the big risk is with things in our own solar system. There are asteroids which are called Earth crossers, and most of the asteroids are between Mars and Jupiter, but not all of them. And some of them happen to have orbits that dip in and either reach Earth's orbit or cross it. And there are enough of them that we have a catalog, and NASA and other space agencies are charged with trying to track these things. And we can track down to, maybe a half mile or so easily. Smaller than that, that's getting harder. The problem is, in space, like a lot of things, there are a few big things and a lot of little things. And even an asteroid that's maybe 50 feet across, which is the one that exploded over Russia a few years ago, that broke a lot of windows and hurt people just exploding in our atmosphere. If it had hit, that would have been pretty unpleasant. Yeah.
A lot of damage. All right, I want to move on to something else. We're talking with Gerry Williger, who is a astronomy professor at the University of Louisville. The SpaceX rocket that launched last week.
Yesterday.
Last Tuesday.
Last Tuesday.
When this airs,
Yes.
When this airs, it'll be last Tuesday. What about it? Is that a big deal? It was kind of cool.
It actually is.
But why is it a big deal?
Well, first of all, it's the biggest rocket to lift off since the Saturn V. Big rockets are expensive. The Apollo program was canceled after Apollo 17. Many of us still cry. So we have smaller rockets that can lift smaller payloads. But one of the problems with space is it's expensive. There's been a cost of about $10,000 a pound to put anything in orbit. And that's really expensive. And that cost has been about the same for the last 30 or 40 years. If you can significantly reduce the cost, then you can send up bigger things or send up more things. So that means that space is more accessible.
Private industry is kind of taking
and
over.
it's private industry.
Right.
And what they did that's really unique and wonderful and helps is they recycle their boosters big time. If you might remember the space shuttle, we took the booster rockets, we fished them out of the ocean, and we recycled them. Yeah, that was some of it. And you had the space shuttle too. But the space shuttle was about $500 million every launch. It is really hard to tell how expensive it is, but you take the entire space shuttle program, divide by the number of launches, that's huge. This might be 90 million. This might be 20% of the cost or so, because they recycle the boosters and they fly back to the launch pad. That was on TV, that you had these two big sticks coming back. And then from what I heard the other day, they tried to get one of the upper stages too, but it didn't quite make it on some ocean platform. So if they can recycle all of that, suddenly instead of $10,000 a pound, it's $2,000 a pound. And just to show if somebody has the money, Elon Musk launched his car into space. Now, I was crying because I have an old car, and I would have loved to have had his car, and I would have given him...
Why is he shooting it into outer space instead of giving it to you, right?
That's right. So he's doing that. And having private industry do things, it's the same thing as, imagine the age of exploration with Columbus, when the king and queen of Spain sent out the ships with the government money, basically. But after a while, you had private industry, and there were more of them. There's more private industry. And so opening up space to private industry, which we've done slowly over the years with satellites, suddenly it's getting to be that there are a lot of people in the space biz.
Right. Talking with Gerry Williger, who's an astronomy professor at UofL. Let's talk a little bit about this. I read about this. I guess they're calling it a star, an artificial star that was put up by some folks in New Zealand that have you and your folks in the astronomy field just aghast. Tell us what it is and why the astronomy community is ticked off about it.
Well, we are not amused. It's basically a big bright ball.
A disco ball is what it looks like.
It's a disco ball. It is, and it's to advertise that this guy in New Zealand or his group had the ability to do it for the heck of it. Why? Oh, yes. Well, look at that star, and we put it up, and oh, isn't it pretty? It's about as attractive as putting up a giant billboard for, fast food or something in Yellowstone National Park or at Mount Rushmore. So can they do it? Of course they can. Is it something that we really want? Maybe not. Space is like Antarctica, actually, and doesn't belong to any one country, and there are treaties about it, but not a whole lot of treaties. So right now it's legal to do that. But what astronomers do is we take pictures of space, and we have long exposures, and we leave our cameras open, our telescopes exposing for hours and hours and hours. If anything crosses the line of sight, then it makes a giant streak and wrecks the picture. Also,
So is this thing making giant streaks and wrecking the pictures of astronomers?
it probably will. Because if you expose
That's
for a long
reflecting
time,
light, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And so does it look like a small star out?
It would look like a bright star. It's like the International Space Station in brightness. And one of the other things to think about, actually, is there is natural beauty out in space. Most people in the world cannot see the Milky Way. They live in cities. We cannot see the beauty of the night sky, and that actually inspires a lot of people to study science, and it connects us to we're on this small planet in the middle of the universe, and if we can't see it, out of sight, out of mind.
Okay. Well, there's another satellite that's going to be up in space here shortly, the TESS satellite. What is the TESS satellite?
Oh, that's a wonderful project. It's a Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite. NASA's going to launch it in mid to late March of 2018, and it's designed to survey the whole sky to look at bright stars that could have planets around them. So it's going to be about 500,000 stars, and the good thing about studying the bright stars, many of them are close, and we can study them in detail and see details about planets like their size, maybe their atmospheric composition, and so on in space.
All right, a couple of things I want to mention before we leave here. Brianna Mills, a student at the University of Louisville, she just won something. What'd she win?
She won a prize for her undergraduate research project. Every year there is a big lodge meeting for astronomers, about 3,000 people somewhere in the U.S. in January. And last month, we had our meeting in Washington, D.C. There were about 100 undergraduates from around the country who presented their undergraduate basically thesis work, and she won a prize. She got the top 5 out of 100 at that big national meeting. And what she was looking at was called dust echoes or light echoes in the interstellar medium. So there are clouds of dust in between the stars, and that dust actually is the same stuff that probably makes up that interstellar visitor. There are some stars which flare up in X-rays, and what that is like having a light flash, a lighthouse flash in a patch of fog, and you can see the outline of the fog for a moment when this star flares up. And she's been combing through data from an X-ray monitor on the International Space Station.
Wow.
To look for it.
Well, that's
and
pretty
it's like
cool
looking
for a
needle,
UofL student in Louisville, Kentucky.
Needle in a haystack. So she looked through a few hundred of these things and found a few of them. And somebody has to do the hard work. This is the 99% perspiration for genius that Thomas Edison always talked about.
Well, congratulations to her, Brianna Mills. And does she want to be an astronomer?
Oh, yes.
Do you know? Okay.
Oh, yes. She's looking for grad schools now. She has
Very
a few
good.
acceptances, and we'll be happy to follow her career. Hope
Very
she
good.
remembers us.
And I heard a guy named Gerry Williger got a prestigious Fulbright Award. Is that correct?
Oh, yes. Well, okay. I got lucky, I think. A Fulbright program funds students and faculty to go to other countries. It's for an international understanding, to teach or do research. It also funds people from other countries to come to the U.S., so it's a good thing. It's been going around since the early 1950s, and over 300,000 people have had some sort of Fulbright grant over the years. So I got a Fulbright grant to go to Hungary for about 5 or 6 months. Now, my parents came from Hungary, full disclosure. I speak the language some, but I'd like to polish it. I work with scientists there. I work on space telescope data, and I have a collaboration with them. So I wrote a research proposal, and the Fulbright committee in the U.S. liked it. They sent it to Hungary. They said, we like it, and so they'll fund me.
So when are you leaving? When do you go?
Sometime in the summer.
Okay. Well, that sounds awesome. Congratulations on winning the Fulbright Award. It really is a big
Thank you.
deal. It's not just luck. It's hard work, and you put it in. So
Thanks. Appreciate
congratulations, Gerry. Appreciate you being on the show. Thanks for listening to UofL Today with Mark Hebert, and go Cards.